Hey Wargamers, today we're going to talk about one of the most iconic units in the Tau Empire, the Crisis Suit. There's a lot to talk about with these guys, but a lot of it is also kind of similar to how it was in the Index. Today we're talking about the Codex version. If you haven't seen my Index video of Crisis Suits, it's in the description below. While you're there, go ahead and hit subscribe. That way you don't miss any of my upcoming unit reviews, battle reports, or other Tau content. Okay, so starting with the profile on these guys, we have movement 8. Really not bad. They have some nice mobility to them. Weapon skill 5, pretty standard for Tau. They're not going to be able to land blows very easily. Ballistic skill of 4. Again, this is a often griped component of the Crisis Suit stat line, but like most Tau, they're hitting on 4s. Strength 5, toughness 5. They have some durability with 3 wounds as well. And then 2 attacks, or 3 if it's a Chazray. Leadership 7 or 8 if there's a Chazray, and then a 3-up save. So overall, a very durable unit compared to other similar types of models, but not excessively so. These aren't Nurgle. They're not going to be on the table forever. They have some vulnerability, but they have some aspects that allow them to perform unique battlefield roles. Looking at the unit complement here, you can actually have between 3 and 9 Crisis Suits. 9 Crisis Suits is a humongous unit that's going to be very points intensive, and so a lot of times you're going to see smaller units if you're seeing Crisis Suits on the battlefield. Each Crisis Suit can be accompanied by up to 2 drones, so if you're taking a unit of 3 Crisis Suits, that's going to be 6 gun drones or shield drones or marker drones or some mixture of those. If you're bringing a unit of 9 Crisis Suits, that's going to be 18 drones. So you can get a lot of bodies on the tabletop just with this one data sheet. Crisis Suits come standard with 1 burst cannon, although they can have up to 3 ranged weapons or supporting systems, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But they come stock with the, well, they just have the For the Greater Good special rule, which allows them to fire Overwatch as if they were being charged for nearby Tau units. They also have the Bonding Knife ritual, which allows them to ignore the result of a morale test on a roll of a 6. So if you're bringing just a couple Crisis Suits, that's not really going to make a big difference. But if you're bringing a unit of 9, that roll of a 6 can save your butt, you know, in some pretty critical points. It certainly has for me. So that 6 on a Bonding Knife ritual is really nice when it comes through for you. And then one of the signature abilities of Crisis Suits is that they have the Manta Strike rule, allowing them to deep strike outside of your deployment zone starting on turn 2. We'll get to that also in just a moment here, because it's a touchy point about Crisis Suits. So looking a little bit more at the options that you have for Crisis Suits, starting with the weapon loadout. Like I said, you can bring between 1 and 3 weapons. You have to have at least 1 weapon. There's no way to not have any weapons on a Crisis Suit, unlike in previous editions. So either you're going to have a burst cannon or you're going to switch it out for up to 3 weapons. And one of the biggest questions that I see right off the bat is, should I bring 2 of 1 weapon and then an advanced targeting system or some other signature supporting system? And the answer is no, don't do that. Don't bring an advanced targeting system on a Crisis Suit with 2 other weapons. And the reason is this. Let's say we're having 2 weapons on a Crisis Suit and we're asking, do I either take a 3rd weapon or do I take an advanced targeting system? And the math there works out so that you're effectively adding 50% weapon output if you're taking another weapon, right? You have 2, you go to 3, that's a 50% increase in damage output. Therefore, the benchmark for if you should bring an advanced targeting system or other supporting system is, does it give me more than 50% output? And the answer is almost always no. There are a few cases where adding an advanced targeting system to 2 weapons is going to give you a 50% increase or more. So like if we're going from someone having a 2-up save to a 3-up save, that's going to make a difference. But in most other cases, it's really not going to make a difference for you. So really, you're almost always going to want to take 3 weapons. What are those weapons going to be? Well, it depends. Looking at the numbers, the most points efficient options for things toughness 5 or more are going to be fusion blasters or cyclic ion blasters. Each of those have different battlefield roles. Fusion blasters are going to be better up close. and against heavier armored multi-wound targets, whereas cyclic ion blasters are a little bit more of a generalist weapon. For things that are weaker, flamers are going to be your best bet. Now, because of that, that puts crisis suits kind of in a weird position. You want them to either be up close or far away. Not that 18 inches is exceptionally far away, but it's a lot farther away than 6 inches or 8 inches, depending on the weapon. So when we're talking about what are the best loadouts, I really like to take either 2 cyclic ion blasters and a flamer, or 2 fusion blasters and a flamer. And the reason why I bring that flamer in is for versatility, but also for charge defense, because if we're dealing with fusion blasters, we're going to want to be close, and that leaves us vulnerable to charging. Same thing with cyclic ion blasters. We're 18 inches away. That's further away than 8, like I said, but it still leaves you vulnerable to charging, and so having that flamer on the crisis suit is not a bad option. Flamers also give you some nice mitigation against that 4-up to hit, especially against things that have modifiers to hit them. So, if we're talking about like Eldar stuff, there's a lot of -1 to hit out there, and so flamers don't care about that. And crisis suits are one of the best vehicles that we have for flamer weapons, the Yvara excluded. So having flamers on crisis suits is, one of the best ways that you can get around that -1 to hit, -2 to hit in some cases for certain types of enemies. And combine that with their Manta Strike ability, you can lay down some surprising damage on units that aren't expecting it with flamers. So those are the 2 different loadouts I would recommend, either cyclic ion blasters or fusion blasters combined with 1 flamer. We also have the option of equipping 1 in 3 crisis suits with an Iridium battlesuit. This makes it have a 2-up save instead of a 3-up save. It's 15 points. Part of the issue with crisis suits is their cost. So you can get close to 100 points per model depending on the loadout, and adding 15 more points on top of that is certainly not great, but if we're going to be kind of investing in crisis suits anyway, I think having 1 Iridium suit in a unit is usable. It gives you some utility, because let's say we get these guys in behind cover and they have the 2-up save. Suddenly a lot of things that are going to tear crisis suits apart are going to have a hard time getting through that unit. So having that 2-up save can make a nice difference, and if you're bringing crisis suits anyway, you're probably not super concerned about points efficiency, so taking the Iridium suit is not a bad choice. As for what types of drones you're going to want to take with crisis suits, you're almost always going to want to take drones, especially with the rule of 3 in place. We can't just bring a bunch of units of tactical drones. We can only bring 3 in a list. So we want to build drones into our units, especially the ones that are going to be using the drones, and crisis suits are one of the units that are going to benefit from having drones around. So when we're looking for a way to get more drones into our list, putting drones with crisis suits, for example, is going to be good not only for the crisis suits, but other units around them. Particularly if we're Manta Striking a crisis suit unit near something that's exceptionally high priority, like a Riptide or a Yvara or a Commander, having those drones not only there for the crisis suit, but for those other units is going to be very useful. One of my favorite ways to use crisis suits is as a drone caddy. They allow me to deep strike drones in places that I wouldn't be able to, or in ways that I wouldn't be able to, because they are accompanying a unit of crisis suits. So yeah, I think drones with crisis suits is almost an auto selection if you're bringing crisis suits. As for what types of drones you're going to want to bring, well, in general it's going to be shield drones, because they're the more points efficient meat shield, shield drone, meat shield, right, for suits. So if we're looking for a way to just get more ablative wounds via saver protocols on the table, shield drones are your way to go. If you're trying to build some sort of high pressure alpha strike list with deep striking crisis suits, then gun drones can potentially be a good option. And then rarely marker drones are going to be an option as well, just in case you're worried about actually having marker lights on a target of interest. In general, I bring between 4 and 8 drones, depending on where you're going. 4 is probably the minimum, and then 6 is probably the most likely size that you're going to want to bring with you. 8, again, if you're bringing 4 or more crisis suits, is going to be fine. It's going to be better to have more drones, but at that unit size, we're running into issues with being able to place them with deep striking, but also morale issues. Drones have a very low morale, and if we're deep striking them, we're probably not going to be doing so within the radius of an ethereal who could actually help address that issue. So we need to be careful with that. So like 4 or 6 is probably the more likely unit size of drones that you're going to see going with a crisis suit team. Crisis suits synergize fairly well with stealth suits. Stealth suits have the ability to take a homing beacon, which can be placed at the beginning of their movement phase, which is a big change compared to the index version. In the Codex, homing beacons are placed at the beginning of the movement phase, giving you a less desirable outcome in terms of where you're actually placing that homing beacon, but nonetheless, you can place that homing beacon at the beginning of the movement phase, probably turn 2 or 3, and deep strike some crisis suits down on top of it, even within 9 inches of an enemy unit. And so this is where taking a flamer can be really useful, is if you're deep striking crisis suits on top of a homing beacon that's within flamer range, you can get some nice damage down on units that aren't expecting it. Kind of similar thing with gun drones. If you put gun drones down on top of a homing beacon because they're coming with a crisis suit team, you can get a lot of damage out just by putting those guys in close proximity to a target unit. I think crisis suits are going to do particularly well in 3 seps in particular. They're going to do well in Tau sept because a lot of times you're going to have crisis suits near other units upfield. So maybe you'll have a Riptide and then a bunch of crisis suits nearby. And so if they're able to overwatch more effectively for that Riptide, if it gets charged, then you're going to have some better output, obviously. Conversely, if the crisis suits get charged, the Riptide's going to help save them more effectively as well. So having them in Tau sept can be a pretty good safeguard against having them upfield where they're going to want to be, as long as there are other units there as well. For bringing gun drones, for example, it helps there too. They're going to do well with Vior La because it alleviates the need for them to deep strike in the first place, or if they do deep strike, it helps them get around the table a little bit more effectively. So because most Tau crisis suit weapons are assault, it means that crisis suits are going to be able to move their 8 inches, then advance, then fire normally. So you're looking at a little bit over 11 inches movement on average with a crisis suit that's advancing. And that's not bad mobility at all. Added on top of that, the 18-inch range of a cyclic ion blaster or fusion blaster, and you're in a pretty good position to threaten a lot of different units on the tabletop. So especially because Manta striking has been, or rather deep striking has been changed so that it can't really be done effectively until turn 2. Using crisis suits in Vior La is more appealing because they can function right off the bat on turn 1 as opposed to having to wait for turn 2. Now, that does mean that some things like the flamer is going to be a lot less valuable in that setup because flamers are so short range and you're starting on the table far away from other things. But nonetheless, I think Vior La is a good choice for crisis suits. The third option that I think is going to do well is Farsight Enclaves. Farsight Enclaves as a whole I don't think does very well. But if we are bringing Farsight Enclaves, crisis suits are not going to be a bad choice, primarily because of their sept stratagem that allows you to add 1 to hit rolls for a battlesuit unit that deep strikes. So instead of hitting on 4s, we're hitting on 3s. Not bad. If you're bringing flamers, doesn't make a difference, but if you're bringing a bunch of fusion blasters, cyclic ion blasters, hitting on 3s, potentially on 2s if you have sufficient marker light support, not shabby at all. The thing with this, though, is that it's a 2 CP stratagem, and we're primarily using it in a Farsight bomb context. So if we were to do this, we would want to invest very heavily in crisis suits. We'd want to have one big unit, maybe like 8-9 suits, have them all loaded up to the 9s, and deep strike them in and just unload on an enemy unit or 2 or 3 or whatever. And the problem with that is that it's like 1,000 points in crisis suits. And so if that's your strategy, you have one shot to make it work, basically. And that's really high risk. And probably not as high of reward. So I think that Farsight Enclaves, if you're bringing Farsight Enclaves, bring Crisis Suits, but if you're bringing Crisis Suits, don't necessarily bring Farsight Enclaves, if that makes sense. The other 3 steps, so Dalith, it's going to be fine because, you know, you could get cover, making that Iridium armor that much better or irrelevant, depending on what's shooting at you. And that's great, but Crisis Suits are going to want to be moving around a lot, so that's going to prevent that cover from taking place, and yeah. So not particularly my favorite option there. Sakia, you know, leadership benefits, being able to reroll a hit, that's okay. Not particularly useful for Crisis Suits compared to anything else. And then Borkan is going to be pretty irrelevant because the only rapid fire weapon that they have is a plasma rifle, and we're not going to bring plasma rifles, sadly. I love plasma rifles. I think they're awesome. Conceptually, I just wish they were better or cheaper or something, but sadly they're not. So really, Tau, Viola are probably the better 2 that you're gonna see, but maybe Farsight Enclaves, depending on how crazy you want to be with the Crisis Suits. As far as if you're going to want to bring Crisis Suits at all in the first place, we have to look at how points efficient they are compared to other things. Certainly with the limit to 3 commanders per army via 1 commander per detachment, that means that Crisis Suits are going to be a more attractive way to bring some of those weapon types, but Crisis Suits are still not very points efficient, and even though you can take fewer commanders now, Crisis Suits aren't that much more appealing because of that. Instead, it just means that you're going to want to spend more points on things like Riptides, which are much more points efficient and much more versatile and durable than Crisis Suits are. So for that reason, I'm not bringing a lot of Crisis Suits in my list now because they just don't have the output or staying power that I would want for the points investment. Instead, I'm going with other things. And because of that, I don't think you're going to see a lot of Crisis Suits in a lot of different lists. Now, that's not to say that Crisis Suits are necessarily bad. It's just that I think there are more points efficient options. If you're looking for a more narrative list or a more themed list, I think Crisis Suits are amazing. The new model is amazing. The fluff behind them, the idea of Crisis Suits is super fun, and they do perform well on the tabletop if you can get them where they need to be and have some good tactics and luck. They can do well. It's just they cost so much that you're giving up another good unit in order to play a slightly less good unit. But yeah. So hopefully that's not super rambly, but overall I like Crisis Suits. There's just better options. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you bring Crisis Suits? Do you not bring Crisis Suits? Why? I know it's a hot button topic for a lot of people, but I'd love to hear your experiences about Crisis Suits in the comments below. As always, happy wargaming. Hey everyone, this video was made possible by my supporters over on Patreon. If you also enjoyed this video, consider joining our community over there. Special thanks to Max Harrison, NoExcusesPanda, Paul Lueders, TauOswell, Nick Steele, Jared Egeler, Brian Mann, Jake Johnson, Eric Jackson, Cristofer Sarale, Youhei Penguin, Andy M. Young, Peter Benjamin Parker, and Giovanni DiMaggio.